Hey everyone, Brandon Snider here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to another episode of New Music Finds, where I like to collect together all the different things that I've purchased over the past week, present it to you. Get it from different places like my local record store, but also online retail like Amazon, eBay, and more. I've got 18 things to run through with you, 17 CDs, one small box set. We'll get into that here in just a bit. But before we do, if you're new to my channel and haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also, leave a comment, hit like, all those things do help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, if you turn on notifications, you're gonna stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this with New Music Finds. So let's dive into it here. I'd like to kick off with new releases. I've got a bunch of things from both this recent week of release from the 22nd, but also the previous week, the 15th. So just depends on when the stuff ships and gets to me. We'll start off with a couple things here from the 22nd. The first one up, The In Machine and their latest album, third studio album, The Quantum Phase. So if you're not familiar with who The In Machine are, it actually features two former members of Doc and George Lynch and Jeff Pilson. We've also got Steve Brown in there on drums, who's the younger brother of Mick Brown. Coming in on vocals for this album here is Garesh Pradam from Garesh and the Chronicles, taking over for Robert Mason, who used to sing for The In Machine. But this album here, really, really good. I have done a full review of that album, so I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check that out. But all in all, if you're looking for some killer Dokken-esque style music, definitely check out the brand new The In Machine. Can't recommend this enough. All right, another one that came out that I wasn't aware that was coming out. Only found it when I went to my local record store and saw it sitting on the wall, and I thought this was just a straight reissue, but it's not. Cure Paris. So this is a live show recorded in '92 on the Wish tour. They got released in 1993. I have the original release of it, which incidentally is in a jewel case, and I like that much better. But what was cool about this, and the reason I decided to add this version of it to my collection, is that two bonus tracks are added, and it's not just that, it's that the whole album has been resequenced. So the tracks don't run in the same order that they once did. One of the songs that is unreleased is placed at the beginning, the other one at the very end of it. So you get a whole different feel when listening to this. Those two added tracks, Shake Dog Shake and Hot Hot Hot, have been added to this. So there you go. Now, one thing to comment on regarding this is, if you can see, there is a line in the back of this. It's an indentation. And when you open it up, not entirely sure why, but it does allow this to bend more to get the disc out. And while I like that they did that, made the ease of getting the disc in and out, it also makes it a bit more flimsy, which means it can get banged up or dented or whatever a lot easier, which is the reason I don't like digipacks, or cardboard cases in this case. All right. Now I got a couple things here that one I also didn't know were coming out, but this was for the previous week. This is for the 15th. And the first one up here, Leviathan Project. And you say, who's that, right? I didn't know anything about this band either, but it features Tim Ripper Owens, and it's got, where's the drummer? There we go. Vinny Appice on drums. So Tim Ripper Owens from Judas Priest, Vinny Appice playing from Black Sabbath and Dio and a whole number of other projects that he's been a part of. This is a Florida-based band, and I don't really know if these two sort of, star musicians were just hired or what. Apparently Ripper sang on the last album. I think this is the first time they've had Vinny Appice in the lineup. And I don't really like those when they just hire somebody famous to come in and do it. But I have to say, the music on here is as good as, say, the vocals are on here, meaning I bought it for Tim Ripper Owens, but I absolutely love the guitar work on this. You can get this off of Amazon. I don't know where else it's being sold. My store didn't know anything about this, and I've never even heard of this band. And I think this is their fourth studio album. But killer art there. Like I said, if you're a fan of Tim Ripper Owens and you want some killer metal, for me, this thing has just shot up my ranking for the year so far to the level of the Blaze Bayley, the Judas Priest, and the Bruce Dickinson. I mean, in terms of having those three killer metal albums, this one here is right up with it. So do yourself a favor, check this out. Wasn't able to find it available to stream, so you're definitely going to have to hunt for it a bit like I did, and maybe just take a chance on it, but it is really good. All right, this one here ended up dropping a week early. I was expecting this one to come out on the 22nd this past Friday, but it actually dropped a week before. Nice when that happens, but I would have ordered it in advance instead of getting it after the fact. Lionheart, The Grace of a Dragonfly. So this one here, a little bit of a super group. We've got Lee Small on lead vocals from the band Shy. And he's joining up with original members to this group who had an album out, I think, back in like '85. Dennis Stratton on guitar, former Iron Maiden. Steve Mann on guitar and keyboards. Rocky Newton on bass, and I forget where all these guys were coming from, but I think Rocky Newton is Michael Schenker group, among others, and Clive Edwards on drums, which I think he was part of UFO and Wild Horses and a number of other projects, maybe even Michael Schenker group as well. But all in all, very cool. And what I found out is that this album is actually a concept album about World War II. Sometimes good, sometimes bad when that happens. This one actually turns out to be really good, meaning you can listen to the album as a standalone thing if you want. And if you listen to the lyrics and pay attention to what's going on, it actually does tell a really great story. But very, very cool melodic hard rock from Lionheart. We have a brand new album from Firewind called Stand United. Band features Gus G on guitar, probably most famously known for having played with Ozzy Osbourne as one of his guitar players, but Firewind, big in their own right. I only have one other album from them in the past, back around maybe 2007, 2008, somewhere in that time frame that I happen to really, really like. Yeah, this is really good stuff. Different singer in here than who I remember from back in the day, but good singer nonetheless. Great, fantastic lead guitar. I've got more solo albums from Gus G than I do Firewind. I think I have 3, maybe 4 Gus G solo albums, whereas I only have these 2 Firewind albums. But I'm a fan of his work, not just from the Ozzy stuff, but he's just a phenomenal guitar player in and of itself. Right, and I mentioned I did get one box set, Mama's Boys. And this one here, which is called Runaway Dreams, 1980, 1992. So we've got 5 albums in this. Let me flip this thing over. This is Irish band and kind of part of the new wave of British heavy metal scene, even though they're not British, but it was that same sort of time frame, that same sort of style of music. I lumped them in with that. But we've got all these things. Now, the 3 albums in the middle here, you know, could be gotten certainly in one way or the other. But this first one here, called Official Bootleg, was essentially their demo, independently released. And so was the second album called Plug It In. Independently released, a little hard to come by, sort of a thing. And then they got picked up, I think, by a major label, or at least a bit bigger label. And they were able to release Turn It Up in 1983. And then they did have another album come out called Relativity in 1992. And I think in between the 83 and 92, they may have had a couple other albums that have come out as well. But this sort of collects together their, you know, more rare or obscure era stuff, which is really nice. This is done by Cherry Red Records, and of course it's one of those clamshell style boxes. We're seeing a lot of these lately, and these are fantastic. I mean, first of all, you get a booklet in it, and you know, the thing that I like about these things is you get photos and you get a write-up of stuff. So not just lyrics, that part's cool. And then you get the actual discs, and they're done as the vinyl replica style thing. So we get the official bootleg, which is cool. Plug It In. We get Turn It Up, which if you recall from me doing the controversial album covers, this one appeared in it, because on the much bigger vinyl version, you can see shows her nipple in it. Relativity. And then there's a singles and B-sides and rarities spanning the years from 80 to 92 on here as well. So not only do you get some unreleased, out-of-print albums and things like that, but you also get, that rarities disc. So all in all, pretty cool thing right there. Definitely recommend that if you're a fan of Mama's Boys, you just want some of that killer new wave of British heavy metal style stuff from an Irish band. Okay, then I, of course, as I mentioned, hit up my local record store, and I'm always finding killer things in there. Just when I think I can't possibly find any more stuff, as I have over 12,000 CDs, I find more. Never seems to amaze me. And you may say, why the heck didn't you have this in your collection already? But debut album from Uriah Heep. This is very heavy, very humble, right? But I don't know. It just was one of those ones I pulled out and I said, I don't have this. Let me give this a listen. It's a 1970 release. And it was just perfect sounding for my ears at the time. And so I said, hey, let me add that to the collection. And another one, The Magician's Birthday, classic album. I have Demons and Wizards, and I have a few of the others in between these, but I just didn't have these two. And decided to add them to the collection. I've got tons and tons of Uriah Heep in the collection, but didn't have those two albums. And I love when I find stuff like that that just fit the right mood. Another one, this is one I actually owned in the past, and the group is called Snafu. It's their debut album. Incidentally, that artwork is done by Roger Dean along with the logo. It doesn't look like the stuff from Yes, but very early start, 1973 here. The reason I had picked it up back in the day was that the guitar player in here is none other than Mickey Moody, who would go on to play with Whitesnake. What I found out since that time is that Bobby Harrison, who played drums with Procol Harum, is the vocalist for this group. And not that I'm a big fan necessarily of Procol Harum, but the fact that those guys came together to form this group, and now that I'm not listening to it in terms of it sounding like Whitesnake, which it really doesn't, although there's a few tracks on here that are kind of in that vein, the more funky sort of sounding Deep Purple era when like Tommy Bolin came into the picture, and Glenn Hughes, and certainly David Coverdale, that era of the band. But there's also stuff on here that is more along the lines of country and folk. So that kind of ranges from some very heavy end organ style music into that. And I think that turned me off at the time. I ended up getting rid of it because it didn't sound like Whitesnake. But my musical tastes have long since expanded. And I decided to give it another go. And surprisingly, I really enjoyed it. So if I had kept it in the collection like I should have, although I was very young back then when I got rid of it, I'd be able to pull that out, which is why now I don't get rid of things, of course. All right, so this was what I actually went into my local record store for, was to see if I could find the self-titled Spocks Beard album. I think this came out in 2007, not the debut, it's just self-titled release, probably because they had changed lead singers, having Neil Morse no longer in the lineup and Nick DiVergio coming in, well, not coming in because he was on drums, just taking over for lead vocals. And I don't know if this is the original way it's done, but this is die cut on here. And you pull that out, that's the album cover. But I thought that was very, very cool because I just assumed the album cover was black with the color showing through it like that and didn't realize it was going to be this way. But that, in this case, I like slipcases. I don't like slipcases normally, but if there's a reason to have it like this, then very cool. So, funny story in that I was listening to something streaming wise, and when that album ended, Apple Music will start playing something else in that vein. And they played the second track off of this album here called Skeletons at the Feast. And it's an instrumental track, and it was just amazing. I had to, stop and look and see who it was, and couldn't believe that I was listening to Spocks Beard. So I immediately wanted to get a hold of this album, and I'm glad that I did. So I went in for that, and while I was there, I was talking to this guy, and he's a big prog guy, and saw that I was picking up the Spocks Beard and some of the other stuff I was getting, and we got into a conversation about the later era of Spocks Beard and how I like them much better with Ted Leonard singing. And he immediately said, well, then you should pick up his original band called Enchant. So I picked up 2 releases and I listened to them in the store, and I'm so glad he recommended it to me because I don't think I knew. I mean, I may have looked when I first found out, but I don't think that I knew that this guy had come from anywhere. and wanting more from the Spocks Beard with Ted Leonard singing and not being able to get it allowed me to find a whole other avenue to hear him singing. And this one here, called Tug of War, turned out to be my favorite of these. It's a 2003 release. Then the band went on a hiatus for 11 years before coming back in 2014 and releasing this album, which is The Great Divide. Like, I have to say, I don't care for this one nearly as much as this one, and it may just take me a little bit to warm up to it, but this one here is right up my alley, right along the lines of what I feel about the Spocks Beard material that he's part of. But all in all, very cool to add some of that to the collection. And I'd also picked this up, D. Snider, Leave a Scar. This album here was the third in a series of solo albums that he did. I don't know that he's doing these anymore with Jamie Jasta of Hatebreed. And I didn't pick this one up. I had the first two, decided to give this one a go, and turned out to be really great. Absolutely loved it. And it was just one of those things that at the time when it came out, didn't float my boat. You know, so sometimes I like to go back and revisit things down the road and see if I still feel that way about it. I'm a big fan of D. Snider, big fan of Twisted Sister, so of course, why wouldn't I want it? But I felt the music was a bit too modern. And I gotta say, listening to it now, I don't really feel that. So I was glad to add it in. I was glad that I hadn't picked it up to find something like that to get sort of unexpectedly having a new D. Snider solo album to listen to. It was a lot of fun. And then you guys saw me post about this one, Force 10, one and only album that they did, debut and only album. Somebody mentioned that prior to this, the band was called Russia, and I think they might have only made one album, and then I guess they changed their name to this. I don't really know the story, haven't even gone into looking into any of that at this point, but I sort of got the vibe of a sort of Styx style, sort of pump rock, bombast style band, you know, the way that Styx is. That's sort of how I related it. And I just bought it because Amazon was selling it for $3.98, and I couldn't believe it. I was scrolling through other stuff and I saw this and I recognized it as an LP. Going to record shows and stuff, having seen this, knowing that it was from 1981. I like my 1980s music. And I saw that and thought, hey, why not for $3.98? Let's just throw it in the cart and get it. And I'm so glad that I did. And I was so impressed with it, I wanted to share it with you guys. So wasn't trying to promote it, wasn't trying to make sales for Amazon or anything of that nature. I just thought, hey, here is a Wounded Bird record release from 2007, and almost everything from Wounded Bird goes up in value. And I thought, a factory sealed $3.98 album that is that good, that's on Wounded Bird, that's worth a lot more. I wanted to share it with you guys. So I know a number of you guys decided to take the chance on it like me. I heard from some of you that you enjoyed it as well. I hope anyone else that picked it up did. But yeah, you know, if I ever come across things that are that good a deal, I want to share it with my other fellow CD fanatics. All right, and then I got some other stuff, but this stuff moves into the alternative rock genre. And so, I think it was last week, I showed the Semisonic latest album from 2023, and I really, really enjoyed that. I think it's called A Little Bit of Sun, and just blew my mind away. I was never really a fan of Semisonic back in the day, but that album did it for me, and I really liked it, so I decided to pick up some other stuff. I found this EP called Youre Not Alone, and it came out in 2020. It was the first new music since, you know, back in the day, since they had reformed. 5 tracks on it, very much in the vein of that new album, so this was great to get. The only older album that I could get a hold of fairly easy, Great Divide, none of it used at my local record store, so I added this, but this didn't really do it for me the way that their, I think it's their second studio album did. This is actually the debut album, by the way. I think it's the debut, if I'm not mistaken. And it's their second album that had the song Closing Time on it. That is really good. That sounds like what I know Semisonic to sound like. So I added that in. I've got those, and I'm on the hunt for the other 2 Semisonic albums. And part of that then was realizing that the frontman, Dan Wilson, has solo material, and I found this one used at my record store called Free Life. Wasn't expecting to find this, wasn't even looking for it. I forget what I was perusing through in the W's, and I said, Dan Wilson, that name sounds familiar. And I pulled it out and I looked at it and quickly Googled, and I was like, wait a minute, that's the guy from Semisonic. So I was able to walk out with a solo album from Dan Wilson. So very cool, good stuff, a little more on the mellower side of Semisonic sounding music, but good nonetheless. What I found out was he's actually a very in-demand, very successful songwriter outside of, his own band. He's gone on to write with a whole host of people like Taylor Swift, Adele, Dierks Bentley. I can't even think of the others, but just the Dixie Chicks. And he's had big hits with them, to where at the point that when their albums won like Song of the Year, Album of the Year, because he also is usually producer of those tracks, he's winning the Grammys of those. So one of my absolute favorite songs by Adele, I think it's called Someone Like You, he co-wrote, and I absolutely love that song. And I found out that he did a covers album of all these songs he wrote for other artists, but he's doing them himself. And so I can finally hear Dan Wilson doing all these ones from other artists that I wouldn't normally listen to because they're not really in my wheelhouse. I'm not going to necessarily listen to the Dixie Chicks or Taylor Swift or stuff like that. And now I can listen to Dan Wilson doing them. I've got that one on order, so you'll see that one next week. But in the meantime, got this album. Here's one I've been looking for a very long time, and I think the issue and me not finding it might really have been that I thought this was a solo album, but it is not. It's actually a band project. Pretty Untwisted, and if you don't necessarily recognize her, that is Jeanette Napolitano. If I'm saying her name right, I apologize if I'm not. Frontwoman for Concrete Blonde. After Concrete Blonde, I think, broke up, this is 95. She formed this band, and I never realized it was a band effort. The guitar player is from the band Wall of Voodoo. So remember them in the song Mexican Radio? When I found that out, it made me want this even more. But I had this back in the day because I was a fan of Concrete Blonde, and I remember picking this up. But at least in my mind, I had thought, because I got rid of it years ago when I was young, I thought it was her solo album. So I have been looking for what I thought was her debut solo album and never finding it, remembering this cover. And I was at Sound Exchange, my local record store, thumbing through, and I said, oh my God, Pretty Untwisted. But I couldn't understand why I couldn't find her name written anywhere on it. Of course, quickly looked up and found out it's not really a solo album, that it was a band project, and that it featured the guitar player from Wall of Voodoo. So I immediately had to purchase it, put it back in the collection, because I've long since become a fan of Wall of Voodoo, where I can't say I was really a fan of them back in the 90s when I was into Concrete Blonde. So maybe that's why I wasn't able to put two and two together. But I do now, and I was so glad to get that and bring that back into the collection. And maybe it's not as hard to come by if I had known that it was just the band Pretty Untwisted. I don't know. But either way, when I saw it and it was still new, still sealed, I picked it up. I think it was $14.99. It was totally worth it for me. Okay, this next one, I don't know how many of you people will know unless you live in Australia. Paul Kelly's greatest hits. Okay, and first of all, it's not a little boy, and I don't even know if he plays trumpet, but this is not trumpet music. But when I was, again, listening to some music on my iPhone commuting and an album ended, it played a Paul Kelly song, and it played the song called Dumb Things. And I think that is maybe one of his bigger hits. And I just thought, wow, what is this? This is so good. And this was the cover that it showed me. And I thought, what the heck am I listening to? Because it sounds like mid-80s, not REM, but definitely, Midnight Oil, NXS styles, music of that sort of era. And I thought, this is really good. So instead of just letting the one song stop, I went ahead and found the album, started it over at the beginning, and began listening to it. And after about 7 songs, I thought, I've got to find out who this guy is and pick something up. And when I looked into it, I found out that he's an Australian. He's a singer-songwriter who apparently is very famous, well-known, just not well-known, I guess, outside of Australia, or I've never heard of him. And yeah, so I just decided to pick this up. It's a greatest hits. It's called Songs from the South, 1985 to 2019. Really, really good stuff from, at least from the 80s part of it so far. I haven't opened, you can see I literally just got it and I haven't cracked into it yet, but I will. It's a 2-disc set. And check out the song Dumb Things. It's number 7 on here if you want to know what I was hearing, what pulled me in, and what got me excited about it. But there you go. So 18 things, 17 CDs, and that Mama's Boys box set. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing about this and all the little backstories around why I picked things up and what I learned after getting them, because that's part of the fun. You get something, you really like it, then I start going to Wikipedia and Googling and checking things out, and I learn so much more about my favorite bands, that other people in the group or somebody, and it just makes me enjoy it that much more. And I hope you guys hearing all the stories that I give you and all that history does the same for you. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.